Welcome to the FASA Leadership Lounge, where we discuss various policies impacting school leaders. I am Michelle White, Executive Director of the Florida Association of School Administrators.
And I'm Jessica Janisiewicz, and I serve as the lobbyist for FASA and a number of school districts here in Florida.
This week, we are going to cover every branch of government in our update and start with some interesting developments this week regarding our legislative session here in Florida, Jess.
We have had some interesting developments. So this week, the House extended their session further. So you may recall that they were operating under a concurrent resolution that would have session go through June 6th. The House said that budget negotiations have fallen apart and they will need more time. And so they came to Tallahassee and voted to extend the session to June 30th, which is the drop dead date for our budget. Interestingly, though, you cannot extend session technically without your other chamber also extending session because it does take both chambers to pass a budget. So the Senate has said, we think we can work through with this June 6th date, and that's what they're going to try to do. If they can't get there, of course, they can come up and extend prior to June 6th, so there is still time. But obviously, as you can tell with the House taking this move, things are not going well currently with the budget negotiations, to say the very least. I know our school districts are getting anxious, understandably, because we need budgets for next year and we do not know how much money we are going to have. So it is very important that they get this work done, and hopefully soon. The Senate president released a memo on Thursday saying that they will not return next week, but that they are making progress. So I think the earliest we can expect to see anyone here would be the week of Memorial Day. So probably that Tuesday following the Memorial Day. And we'll know next week. The Senate president said he knows and understands that for his members, having to live with these kind of weekly updates and not knowing if they're going to return to Tallahassee makes it very difficult to plan. So he plans to tell them hopefully next week, as soon as possible, if they're going to be coming back. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. And at the federal level, Congress is also trying to establish a budget. And right now, they're in a process called budget reconciliation. So this process allows Congress to work relatively quickly on proposals related to spending, taxes, and the debt ceiling. One of the biggest advantages is that it's not subject to a Senate filibuster where a 60-vote threshold would be required. Right now, we have 53, Republican senators and 47 that are Democrats, really including 2 that are independent that normally vote with the Democrats. So the Republicans would not have that 60-vote threshold anyway, but this budget reconciliation process only requires a simple majority to pass the bill. So important is that it can include mandatory spending programs like Medicaid and school meals. It does not affect annual appropriations funding, which is how most of the federal K-12 programs like Title I and IDEA funding are allocated. So the reconciliation cannot also include non-fiscal provisions like establishing a federal school voucher program or make changes to Title IX. So putting this into action looks like that the House and the Senate both have to pass budget resolutions, which will outline the revenue and the spending goals. They have done this, and they have passed identical resolutions. It was the second round for the House, but they came and matched the Senate, which those resolutions will cut taxes right now by $5 trillion with a T, but only cut spending by $4 billion with a B. So we do expect the spending cuts to grow. Estimates are hoping for $2 trillion is what they're hoping to cut. Although this reconciliation doesn't directly impact the annual appropriations process that's used to fund most of our K-12 programs, it still is going to impact us in a couple of ways. And here's how. First is around school meals. So this is a mandatory spending program, but a cut would reduce the number of students that could be eligible to receive those free meals. Second is around just overall annual federal funding. If those tax cuts happen without a corresponding decrease in mandatory spending, the annual deficit is going to increase overall. The increased deficit considerations are going to be that major factor in determining annual appropriations for programs through K-12 education and other areas. Last but not least, there could directly be impacts to Medicaid, which is the fourth largest source of federal funds for our K-12 education. It reimbursed more than $7 billion last year to schools for health services and personnel provided to students under the IDEA or who were eligible for Medicaid. So indirectly, any significant cuts to Medicaid is going to put great pressure on our state budgets that will also likely squeeze some education funding as well.
Well, speaking of Medicaid, which is not something that we normally talk a lot about when we talk about education, but Michele and I actually were part of a meeting with folks from AHCA, which is the Agency for Healthcare Administration here in Florida, to meet with their Medicaid team. We met with them as well as individuals from FSBA, the school boards, and FADS, the Superintendents Association. We were there because it came to our attention that AHCA has been using a formula to determine reimbursement for Medicaid for school districts that was developed in the late 1990s. I think they said around 1997. So obviously, long time ago.
Oh my goodness.
Almost 30 years ago.
Yes.
Things have changed, obviously, quite a bit in that time, both between for funding wise, of course, and then also services that are offered. You know, there have been developments and we know better treatments for kids that we're providing students when they need them. So our goal was to get them to try to update that formula. And actually the federal government has a requirement for all of the states to submit basically a new way of for their formula by July of 2026. So it was very nice to meet with those folks. They talked to us about what their plan is, their willingness to talk to all of the associations so that we can then share information with our members to try to get the best possible product for this formula. So when they are going to have to, of course, go through the whole process. It's government folks, so we've got a process that will be developed over time. But it was great to get to sit down with them and hear what they're planning and be able to have a role in that.
And also to be able to have the voice of our school leaders included in this conversation, and because they, of course, work more in the healthcare agency, they are not as informed about a lot of how school districts work and what that looks like, who the best contacts are. So it was great to have all three organizations sitting at the table and able to provide those resources, able to share more about who else as part of our three memberships could they reach out to and partner with to share information. And so what's next is that they are going to provide some draft rule language, and they really want feedback, which is wonderful. We're excited to see what that looks like and be able to share that with our members across the board and get some feedback to them. They also want to include in there what the cost reimbursement methodology would look like. So getting into the specifics. So we're going to need administrators that are really in that area of work for schools and districts. Of course, VASA and other organizations will share out the information. And the hope in the timeline would be that everything is implemented by that federal deadline that you mentioned, Jessica, of July 1, 2026. So we still have a little ways to go, but it is in process.
It's great. It was a great meeting, I thought, and I certainly learned a lot, and I'm interested to hear from our members and get their feedback as well.
Absolutely.
On the judicial side, the U.S. Supreme Court heard two cases recently involving K-12 education. The first is a case about whether Oklahoma can create and oversee a religious public charter school, Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School. The court will consider whether funding for the school violates the First Amendment, prohibiting the government from establishing or favoring a religion, or whether denying the school is religious discrimination. The school plans to teach a Catholic-centered curriculum while receiving public education funds. The Supreme Court justices appear to be split on the issue. However, Justice Amy Coney Barrett recused herself from the case, so a tie is possible. A day earlier, the Supreme Court heard the case of a Minnesota teenager with a rare form of epilepsy whose school did not accommodate her need to be taught in the afternoon and evening because of morning seizures. The family sued the school district to have these services provided, citing IDEA and the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act. The High Court is considering to what extent and what burden of proof the family must meet to receive compensatory damages under ADA. The student's family argued that lower courts made it too difficult to sue public schools for failing to meet the educational needs of students. And a decision on both of those cases is expected next month.
And of course, we know those cases certainly can set precedents for how things are handled here in Florida, just as we have seen Florida cases change how things are handled across the country.
Absolutely.
So two of our branches, let's talk about the third, which is the executive branch. And that's where the Florida Department of Education and the State Board of Education come into play. Both of those sit, of course, under the executive branch, under the governor's office. And first, I want to share that the DOE released a call for work group members as they look to revise the Florida Educator Accomplished Practices, or what we know as the FEAPS. They are looking for teachers and administrators to review evidence-based, high-quality instructional practices and research supporting the science of learning. So we would encourage you, if you are interested and you need more information, please reach out to us. Maybe look in the last week's Friday Facts. Usually we have some updates in there from the Department of Education, or the DOE website is always another great place for it. Then second, they also have a number of workshops relating to rules that are under development that are happening this week. So I would encourage those especially focused on safety. So even our principals and APs to consider listening into those workshops where you can. I know it's a really crazy time at the end of the school year, but your input can help change those rules for the better.
Absolutely. And so let's talk about what may be next. Who knows? Truly, we'll be looking first and foremost for the budget and any conversation. The first step, of course, would be to get those allocations, which is the big numbers that we're going to use to, number one, the big number for the budget, and then, of course, the numbers for each of the silos. That would actually start the budget conferencing process. So it would be very great to get an announcement that they finally reached that number. That would be wonderful. And then, of course, we have all those bills that we've talked about that were passed by the legislature, and they will be sent as they are engrossed and enrolled. The officers, being the Senate president and the Speaker of the House, will decide when those bills are sent to the governor, and then he will, of course, either sign or veto them. I think in particular, we'll be looking for the fix for the school start times, as well as the school safety bill, which had that clarification about the locked doors and gates, as those are things that we know districts are very anxious to see those policies amended. So we will keep you posted as the bills are sent to the governor and signed.
Absolutely. And that is our update for this week. We appreciate everyone listening. We encourage you to please share the FASA Leadership Lounge with your colleagues. Come to Discover 25 and see Jessica and I. Let's talk about this policy. We'll do some live recording while we're there. And of course, always as a resource for you is our website at fasa.net. We look forward to sharing more in the future, so stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lounge podcast presented by the Florida Association of School Administrators. Today's podcast was hosted by Michelle White and Jessica Janasiewicz. The podcast is produced by Jeff Willoughby. Special thanks to musical director David Higgins. Make sure to subscribe to the Leadership Lounge podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts. New episodes are released each Monday. For show topic suggestions, questions, or comments, please email communications@fasa.net. We hope you enjoyed the show.